If you're hanging out in your living room playing Baldur's Gate 3 and you happen to see a little water on the floor, you might think, no big deal. The cat must have knocked over a cup. Again, nothing a paper towel can't fix. But if that water is all over the floor, it's pretty obvious there's something more systemic going on. Flood from a storm perhaps, or a burst pipe soaking all your rugs and shoes and vintage comic book collection. And is that Fluffy paddling along over there? Rising prices can be an isolated issue, a single glass of water spilled on the floor that's easy enough to clean up. But they can also be an across-the-board increase, flooding every section of the economy. And like mounting floodwaters, rapidly rising prices are a big problem because just like a burst pipe wreaks havoc on your shag carpeting, ruins your furniture, and drenches your unhappy cat, skyrocketing prices can be devastating to consumers and the economy as a whole. That's why economists have developed ways to understand, catalog, compare, and even predict rising prices. And while some price increases are to be expected, even welcomed as a sign of a healthy economy, an economy totally flooded with higher prices is bad news. Hi, I'm Matt Sofa, and this is Study Hall, Macroeconomics. Rising prices over time is known as inflation. You hear it a lot when talking about econ, and it usually sounds a little bit scary, like garlic to a vampire, a silver bullet to a werewolf, or ants to my fiancé. But actually, like the occasional capsized water glass, a little bit of inflation is to be expected, and maybe even ideal? Most economists see a small amount of consistent inflation, between 1 and 3% a year, as the sweet spot. For producers, commanding a slightly higher price is more motivating than a slightly lower one, leading to more production and more jobs. A little bit of inflation is definitely preferable to the opposite, deflation, or when prices fall, which can be a sign of a stagnating economy. The inflation that is bad for economies tends to be erratic and excessive, higher than 3% a year. But even when inflation is cozily in that low and predictable category, we still have to deal with the consequences of any price change. And the first step for economists to understand what the heck is going on with inflation and how best to deal with it is to watch what's going on with the prices of goods and services across the board. Price increases can be calculated mathematically by finding the percentage growth rate, or how much the price of a specific good or service has grown. Like, if your favorite pineapple rice bowl from Sofa's Stir Fry Shack was $8 last year and is $8.50 this year, economists don't just want to fish out the extra 2 quarters to make up the difference. They want to know how much that price has grown percentage-wise, because that's easier to compare with the increases of other goods, like the boba tea you add onto your order. To find the percentage growth rate of an item, we subtract our past price from our current going rate and divide that by that original price. Then multiply by 100 to make our number into a neat little percentage. Simply, we can show this equation as variable x at time t as equal to the current price minus past price divided by past price times 100. For our rice bowl, that adds up as 6.25%. Most likely, that 6.25% growth rate in a price for a single item in a year isn't due to 1 year of general inflation alone. Maybe Sofa's Stir Fry Shack had been reluctant to change the price for a few years, so this price jump actually reflects the last 4 years of minor inflation. Or maybe a trendy food influencer snapped a pic for the gram, inspiring a full-on rice bowl rush, driving up demand and price along with it. Or maybe there was an issue with pineapple supply, meaning the Stir Fry Shack had to pay more for the raw ingredient and therefore increased rice bowl prices to make up the profit difference. So, while it's really helpful for businesses, consumers, and economists alike to calculate the percentage growth rates for specific items, they need to look at a little more to understand what's going on with inflation in the economy as a whole, even if that specific item is the most delicious rice bowl in the whole city. Instead, economists use percentage growth rates across a variety of goods and services to determine the true inflation rate. The inflation rate is the percentage growth rate of a price index, rather than just one specific good. Price indexes don't just measure the price of a single good, but checks in on prices across many different goods and services to get a better feel for how much prices are increasing in general. It's like measuring how much water is flooding into your basement overall, rather than just at the deepest point. The Consumer Price Index and GDP deflator are 2 common price indexes. By comparing them over time, rather than just at the price of a specific delicious rice bowl, we can get a better idea of what inflation is actually looking like for the economy as a whole. But even though the scope is much bigger, the math is pretty much the same. To calculate general inflation rates, you can subtract past CPI or GDP from current CPI, divide by past CPI, and multiply by 100. Using price indexes to calculate inflation gives economists a pretty good idea about the health of the economy. But understanding inflation can also give consumers a better idea of just how much their money can buy. Even regular, stable amounts of inflation over many years can affect purchasing power, or the total amount of stuff the same piggy bank can buy. And that can lead to a misunderstanding about what things should cost. Back in the day, a movie ticket might cost 25 cents. You could get a cup of coffee for a nickel and a trip to the hair salon for a fresh bob, all the rage in the 1920s. It would only set you back $5. But it's not like your grandparents were getting the deal of the century at every turn. It's just that purchasing power was stronger, meaning each dollar was worth more and could take you farther. Think about those stories of how people in the late 19th century built a whole life with only $1,000 as their life savings. As inspirational as that may sound, one estimate shows that $1,000 had the value of almost $32,000 in 2024. You might also have heard phrases about dollars from a particular time period. Like your great Uncle Rudy might say, "Well, I bought my house for $30,000 in an attempt to make you and your cousins feel terrible about the fact that you've all been renting for the past decade. But then your cousin Lindsay might scoff and say, "Yeah, like that was $1972. Thanks to very gradual, normal levels of inflation, the purchasing power of that same amount of money has decreased a lot since great Uncle Rudy was paying attention to the house market. The house you can buy for $30,000 in 2023 is, a fixer-upper. To help set him straight, you and Lindsay can use the good old handy-dandy CPI to pinpoint just how much purchasing power has changed over the years. And once all the math is said and done, no one shopping for a home in this day and age would be surprised to discover that the same house great Uncle Rudy purchased for a neat $30K would cost a whopping $211,000 in 2022. Just to adjust for inflation since 1972, not counting all the other messy housing market variables. But a decrease in purchasing power isn't the only effect of inflation. And the higher, more unpredictable the inflation rates, the higher the cost. One other side effect is menu costs, which businesses face when they have to change prices and have to reprint menus or other signage to reflect changing prices. There are also shoe leather costs, the added cost of running to and from the ATM, like transaction fees and the literal wearing down of the soles of your shoes, hence the name. These added costs and added inconvenience affect businesses and customers alike, but aren't the end of the economic world. Another more wide-reaching effect is something you can't measure numerically, but it is something I personally feel every single day of my life: uncertainty and confusion. In general, both suppliers and demanders get more cautious when they don't know what the future holds, making fewer high-risk, high-reward investments or spending choices. And that's a problem, because a successful economy needs people to feel empowered and to take those big swings. Build that new factory, quit your job and start a business, buy a house. When people slow their spending and businesses drop production, GDP plummets accordingly and the whole economy grinds to a standstill. Another weird, unintended side effect of inflation is a small degree of redistribution of wealth from lenders to borrowers. Now, we're not talking about redistribution of wealth, like taking all the money from billionaires and divvying up amongst the rest of us. But it's still enough to make banks and other lenders clutch at their pearls. Nadia works at a bank and evaluates the loan applications of small businesses. Paolo applies for a loan of $10,000 to get his car mechanic business off the ground, to be paid back in a full lump sum 2 years later. Nadia agrees to lend Paolo $10,000 today with the understanding that Paolo will pay back $11,000 in 2 years. That corresponds to an interest rate of slightly less than 5%. Both Nadia and Paolo expect that inflation will hold steady at about 2% per year, meaning that the purchasing power of the dollars that Paolo pays back in the future will be worth about $10,573 in purchasing power. Nadia and Paolo are both down for this. The loan costs Paolo a little bit, but it's just what he needs to get his business started. And Nadia earns a little bit in interest, even after inflation. So Paolo spends the $10,000 immediately on the equipment he needs, begins using it to fix cars, and starts to generate revenue. All is going according to plan. But then prices start to rise, and rise, and rise. Inflation creeps up to a rate higher than either Paolo or Nadia expected, somewhere around 6%. Purchasing power dips, and by the time that 2 years is up, that $11,000 Paolo's due to pay back is now only worth the equivalent of $9,790. Paolo's lucked out because he bought the machines with better purchasing power in the past. He pays back less in purchasing power than he borrowed. On the flip side, Nadia receives less in purchasing power than she lent, $9,790 instead of the $10,000. And forget about the interest she'd been planning to profit on. She would have never agreed to those terms if she anticipated the higher inflation. But for many people, the costs of inflation are a lot higher than losing money on a loan and a lot more tangible than amorphous fear and uncertainty. People who were living paycheck to paycheck before high inflation can experience serious distress when everything from rent to groceries seems to be getting more expensive, especially if their employer is unwilling to bump up their paycheck accordingly. And in countries where inflation really goes crazy, people's life savings can dwindle to nothing. In countries like Argentina, combinations of loss of faith in the value of currency, production challenges like drought, and low reserves in central banks have driven yearly inflation into the triple digits at times, plunging nearly half of its residents into poverty and leading to political crisis as of 2024, which is exactly why the work economists do to understand what drives inflation is so important. It's easier to prevent rapid inflation before it occurs, using tools like higher interest rates, than it is to bring it down once the climb has begun. Understanding the ins and outs of inflation and being able to compare past purchasing power with our current can influence our financial choices on an individual basis, as well as financial arguments at the dinner table. And for banks, economists, policymakers, tracking and anticipating and preventing inflation is a full-time job juggled by institutions like the government. Because when inflation runs away, a country's economic, political, and social stability is more than likely to run away with it. If you're enjoying this series and are interested in taking the full study hall macroeconomics course and earning college credit from ASU, check out gostudyhall.com or click on the button to learn more. And if you want to help us out, give this video a like, comment, and smash that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. See you next time.